Welcome to the realm of your favorite horror storyteller. This video contains multiple scary stories. Be sure to watch until the very end. Should you wish to navigate between stories, time codes are provided below. Also, thank you for all your feedback and support so far. We appreciate it. Now let's get started. The brisk October air nipped at Ethan's cheeks as he strode through the tangled rows of Miller's farm, his breath visible in the pale moonlight. The old farm was a relic, nestled on the outskirts of their sleepy town, known for the legend of Old Man Miller, who vanished on Halloween night decades ago, leaving only a field of withered crops and a weathered barn in his wake. "Come on, slowpokes," Ethan called out to his friends, who were cautiously picking their way through the pumpkin patch, casting nervous glances at the gnarled trees that bordered the field. Halloween was Ethan's element, the one time of year when his love for the macabre and the spooky became a communal celebration. He had convinced his friends to start the night with a pumpkin carving contest. Best jack-o'-lantern wins bragging rights for a year. Lara, Ethan's childhood friend who prided herself on not buying into scary stories, held a flashlight under her chin, casting long shadows across her face. "Ooh, I'm so scared," she mocked in a ghostly wail. "Old Man Miller's going to get us." But as they ventured deeper, even Lara's bravado faltered. The pumpkins here were different, bigger, stranger, as if they'd been fed on the whispers of the farm's eerie past. That's when Ethan saw it, the pumpkin. It wasn't the largest nor the most symmetrical, but it had an aura of malice, its natural creases forming a twisted grin. "That's the one," he said, a sense of triumph in his voice as he pointed towards the misshapen gourd. "You sure, man?" Tyler, the group's skeptic, raised an eyebrow. "Looks like trouble." "It's perfect," Ethan insisted, his eyes not leaving the pumpkin, which seemed to stare back with a challenge. With some effort, he pried it from the vine's tight grip, and the air around them grew perceptibly colder. By the time they returned to Ethan's house, a sense of unease had settled over the group. They lined up their pumpkins on the porch, the other gourds round and cheerful in the glow of the porch light. Except Ethan's, which seemed to absorb the light, its grin more pronounced in the shadows. As they scooped out the insides and carved faces into their pumpkins, Ethan's knife slipped repeatedly, guided by an unseen force. His pumpkin's eyes took shape, hollow and deep, and the mouth seemed to stretch, the grin slicing wider across the bulbous surface, dripping a thick black sap onto the porch. "You're really going for the horror theme, huh?" Lara joked, trying to lighten the mood, but her laughter was tinged with unease. They placed candles inside their creations, stepping back to admire their handiwork. One by one, the pumpkins came to life with flickering candlelight, except Ethan's. It didn't need a candle. Its grin seemed to glow from within, casting shadows that danced and twisted on the porch like silent specters waiting to pounce. "Okay, that's pretty cool," Tyler admitted, though he kept his distance. "How'd you do that?" "I didn't," Ethan murmured, his voice almost a whisper. "It's doing it on its own." The jack-o'-lantern's grin seemed to mock them, the black sap reflecting the moonlight like a pool of oil. The laughter and chatter died down as a chill descended upon them, a whispering wind swirling around, carrying with it the scent of decay and the faintest echo of Old Man Miller's legacy. The night was just beginning, and already, Halloween was proving to be more than they'd bargained for. As the friends gathered their things, ready to head out into the night's festivities, Ethan cast one last glance at the grinning pumpkin. He could have sworn he saw a flicker of something in its hollow eyes, a hint of cunning, of malevolence. Shaking off the feeling, he closed the door behind him, unaware of the forces he had unwittingly unleashed. As the evening progressed, the carefree laughter of children dressed as ghouls and superheroes filled the air. Ethan's group of friends mingled with the crowd, their earlier encounter with the ominous pumpkin, temporarily forgotten amid the revelry of trick-or-treating and the raucous laughter of costumed partygoers. But as the night deepened, a change came over the town. A cold wind began to howl through the streets, carrying with it a strange whisper that seemed to rustle through the leaves and rattle the windows. The festive lights flickered, casting long, darting shadows against the houses. One by one, The trick-or-treaters retreated indoors, an unspoken unease spreading amongst them. Ethan, Lara, and Tyler found themselves walking down a narrow lane, the houses here older and the decorations more elaborate. Jack-o'-lanterns leered from every stoop, their candles guttering in the growing wind. But it was one particular pumpkin that caught Ethan's eye, a replica of the one he had left on his porch, its grin wide and malicious. "Guys, do you see that?" Ethan pointed toward the pumpkin, its grin seemingly wider than before. "It's just a pumpkin, Ethan," Lara said, though her voice was less certain. "Let's keep going." As they continued, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. He glanced back repeatedly, half expecting to see the pumpkin from his porch rolling after them, its grin slicing through the darkness. But it was only the shadows that seemed to chase them, growing longer and more distorted with each step. It wasn't long before they realized they were no longer on the familiar path. The houses here were decrepit, their windows like dark, empty eyes. The decorations were old and worn, not a single light to guide their way. They had wandered into the forgotten part of town, where stories of haunted dwellings and ghostly apparitions were passed down through generations. "This isn't right," Tyler muttered, his usual skepticism drowned out by the creeping dread. "We should have hit Main Street by now." Lara's flashlight flickered, then died, plunging them into darkness. They stood there, hearts pounding as the whispers grew louder, surrounding them with voices that seemed to speak a language as old as fear itself. And then they saw it, the glow of a singular jack-o'-lantern, perched atop an old iron gate that led to a house shrouded in ivy and despair. Its light was not warm or inviting, but cold and blue, casting an unearthly pallor over everything it touched. Without knowing why, they were drawn to it, their feet moving of their own accord. As they approached, the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of silent screams that reverberated in their skulls. The pumpkin's grin seemed to beckon them, promising untold secrets and forbidden knowledge. They stood before the gate, unable to move forward, yet unable to tear their eyes away from the jack-o'-lantern's mesmerizing glow. It was then that the ground beneath them began to tremble, and a low, guttural laughter rose from the bowels of the earth, shaking the very air around them. "What did you do, Ethan?" Lara's voice was tinged with accusation, her eyes wide with horror. But before Ethan could reply, the gate swung open with a groan, inviting them into the darkness beyond. They were on the precipice of a nightmare, the jack-o'-lantern's grin their only guide into the abyss. The ancient gate, with its iron maw agape, seemed like a passage to another realm, a place where the veils between worlds grew thin and the dead whispered through the rustling leaves. The children, though bound by a tapestry of fear, felt an irresistible compulsion drawing them forward. Ethan, Lara, and Tyler crossed the threshold, their footsteps echoing ominously. The laughter that had beckoned them now fell silent, replaced by the palpable heartbeat of the night. They followed the dim light of the jack-o'-lantern, which hovered in the air like a will-o'-the-wisp, leading them to the house that seemed to sag with the weight of untold sorrows. The facade was a grotesque mask, windows cracked and gaping, the door ajar as if disgorging a long-held breath. Ivy crawled up the sides like constricting veins on weathered skin, and the jack-o'-lantern settled on the porch as if returning to its rightful throne. "I don't like this," Tyler whispered, a sentiment echoed in Lara's clenched fists and Ethan's quickening pulse. But the house called to them, its whispers more insistent than the wind that now caressed their necks with icy fingers. As they entered, a chill enveloped them, the darkness within far surpassing the night outside. The jack-o'-lantern's glow cast monstrous silhouettes that danced upon the decaying walls. With each step, the dust stirred, rising like specters to greet them. They explored the ground floor, a labyrinth of rooms and corridors that seemed to shift and sigh with a life of their own. Ancient portraits adorned the walls, eyes following them, expressions twisted in silent screams or mocking laughter. Furniture lay draped in white sheets like ghosts frozen mid-haunt. Then a sound, a child's giggle, distant and distorted, led them to the base of a grand staircase, its balusters like the ribcage of some titanic beast. The giggle beckoned them upward, and they ascended, drawn by the inexplicable desire to discover its source. At the top, they were met with a corridor lined with doors, The laughter echoed from behind each one, a chorus of childish mirth that was anything but innocent. Lara reached for a doorknob, and the laughter ceased abruptly as if the children behind the doors were holding their breath. She pushed it open, revealing only darkness. But as they peered inside, the darkness seemed to peer back, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay. The jack-o'-lantern flared brightly, its grin stretching impossibly wide, and then the darkness surged forward, engulfing Lara in its embrace. She screamed, a sound that would haunt Ethan and Tyler forever, and when the darkness receded, she was gone, swallowed by the shadows that had claimed her. Ethan and Tyler, hearts hammering against their ribs, ran. They stumbled through the corridor, the house alive with the sound of Lara's screams and the childlike giggles that now sounded predatory. Down the staircase they hurtled, past the leering portraits and through the rooms that had become a maze of horror. The house seemed to stretch and distort, the exit an ever-receding promise. Behind them, the jack-o'-lantern followed, its grin a beacon of malevolence, and the very air around them vibrated with the sound of Lara's name, whispered with the sibilance of a snake. The house was no longer just a house. It was a living, breathing entity, and they were within its belly, being slowly digested by its ancient hunger. They could see the door ahead, the darkness pressing close when suddenly a figure stepped into their path. Not Lara, not a ghost, but something far older and more terrible, a silhouette outlined by the unholy light of the jack-o'-lantern. The figure spoke, its voice a symphony of screams and whispers. "You should not have come here. You should not have listened to the Grin." And as the words washed over them, reality blurred, and Ethan and Tyler found themselves not in the house, but in their own homes, safe in their beds, the night outside silent and dark. But the silence was a lie, and the darkness was full of eyes. The dawn that broke over the neighborhood was a charade, a veil of light over an abyss that had opened the night before. Ethan and Tyler awoke in their beds, but the comfort of daylight could not chase away the horrors that had claimed the darkness. They met under the somber sky, the sun masked by heavy clouds, the air as still as a crypt. The night's terrors were etched in their eyes, a haunted gaze that spoke of truths too ghastly to articulate. They had to go back. They had to find Lara. The house stood defiant against the day, its shadows deep and impenetrable, as if light dared not trespass. The door was agape, just as they remembered, the silence within beckoning. They entered, the jack-o'-lantern's grin now absent, its flame extinguished, but its presence lingered, a malignancy in the air, a stain upon the world. They called for Lara, their voices hollow in the oppressive silence. The house seemed to listen, the very walls leaning in with bated breath. Then the laughter started again, but this time it was not the carefree laughter of children. It was the sound of something that knew no joy, only hunger. The boys moved with purpose, their every step a defiance. They climbed the stairs, which groaned under the weight of their resolve. The corridor of doors awaited, each a sentinel to a realm of fear. They chose a door, different from before, and threw it open. Inside they found a room shrouded in cobwebs, the furniture draped in white, like specters in mourning. At the center, a figure stood with its back to them. Lara. But around her neck, the jack-o'-lantern hung like a grotesque amulet, its grin reignited, basking the room in a hellish glow. As they approached, Lara turned, her eyes hollow, her mouth moving with silent screams. The pumpkin's light pulsed, and the room seemed to breathe with it, the walls flexing, the shadows writhing. Lara reached out, her hand a claw of desperation. Ethan and Tyler rushed to her side, their hands clasping hers, their combined strength fighting against the pumpkin's unnatural pull. They pulled, and with a sound like a wound tearing open, Lara was freed, the jack-o'-lantern falling to the floor with a thud that shook the room. The house trembled, a low growl rising from its depths, the very foundation screaming in rage. They ran, half dragging Lara between them, her strength returning with each step towards escape. Behind them, the house convulsed, the rooms collapsing into each other, the darkness at their heels a living thing. The laughter turned into howls, a cacophony of madness that sought to consume them. They burst through the door, the daylight an explosion of reality, the house's final cry echoing into silence. They didn't stop, didn't look back, until they reached the safety of the crowd that had gathered, drawn by the spectacle of the house that now lay in ruins, its fury spent, its presence expunged. The jack-o'-lantern lay amidst the wreckage, its grin finally extinguished, the curse it had carried now nothing more than a bad dream fading in the morning light. They held each other in the aftermath, the truth of what had occurred a shared secret that bound them together. Lara was safe, but the innocence they had lost was a price paid in full to the shadows that still watched from the corners of their eyes. As the years passed, the story of the haunted house and the jack-o'-lantern that grinned with malevolence became a tale told in hushed tones, a warning to those who tread too close to the veil between worlds. And every Halloween, when the pumpkins were carved, Ethan, Lara, and Tyler would remember, and they would ensure that no pumpkin ever bore a grin quite like the one they had seen. For in that grin lay an abyss, and they had gazed into it, and it had gazed back. The cold October wind howled through the streets of Davenport, rustling the crisp fallen leaves into frenetic dances. Under the watchful gaze of a crescent moon, a group of teenagers gathered at the outskirts of Hollow Creek, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. Alex, a reluctant participant, stood among them, wrapped in the safety of his friend's laughter, which cut through the chilly air like a warm blade. "Dude, are you seriously chicken?" teased Mark, a lanky boy with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "It's just a bunch of stupid Halloween stories. The Craven House, the witch's curse, it's all crap made to scare kids." Alex felt his pride sting. He wasn't a believer in the supernatural, but something about Hollow Creek set his nerves on edge. It wasn't just the dilapidated houses that seemed to leer with unseen eyes, or the unsettling stillness that blanketed the area. It was the stories that had woven themselves into the fabric of Davenport's history, the tale of the witch who had cursed the land when her child disappeared on Halloween night many years ago. "All right, fine," Alex retorted, the words sharp with feigned confidence. "Let's just get this over with. The sooner we prove there's nothing here, the better." The teens had set the rules for the dare. Each must walk the entirety of Hollow Creek, trick or treat at every hauntingly silent house, and whoever reached the Craven House at the end of the lane would be crowned the bravest, or the most foolish. Legend had it that the witch granted one wish to those who proved their courage on this night. Clad in their costumes, they looked like a motley crew of horror movie stereotypes: a vampire, a ghost, a zombie, and Alex, who'd begrudgingly donned the hat and sword of a pirate. They approached the first house, its windows dark, the only light coming from a jack-o'-lantern whose grin seemed to mock their venture. The night progressed, and with each ring of a doorbell, they were greeted by odd characters. There was the woman with hair as white as the moonlight, her eyes milky and distant, who handed them candies that squirmed in their wrappers. Then the tall man with a top hat, whose shadow seemed to stretch too far into the darkness, offering them apples that felt unnaturally warm to the touch. Despite the eerie encounters, the group's laughter grew louder, fueled by adrenaline and the relief that came with each uneventful trick-or-treat. That is, until they turned the corner onto Elm Street, where the true heart of Hollow Creek began to show its twisted visage. There, floating at the street's end, was the outline of a child in a ghost costume. Its movements were unnatural, as if carried by an unseen current of air rather than feet. Alex's breath caught in his throat, and he exchanged a look of concern with his friends. They'd all seen it. The ghost that wasn't quite a ghost, a specter that beckoned them forward with a silent, ethereal hand. "Are you seeing this?" whispered Sophie, her voice a tremulous note of awe and fear. They followed, drawn by the mystery and the thrill, the legend of Hollow Creek pulsing through their veins like a living thing. As they neared the Craven House, a sense of vertigo took hold, the world tilting on an unseen axis. The streetlights flickered, casting shadows that twisted and turned in a maddening dance. Time seemed to stretch and compress, distorting their senses until they stood, disoriented and panting, at the edge of the Craven House's lawn. The child in the ghost costume stood before the wrought iron gate, its head tilting to the side as if to invite them in. Then, with the blink of an eye, it vanished, leaving behind the echo of a child's giggle that was swallowed by the night. Alex's heart hammered in his chest, a rhythm that matched the others. This was no longer a simple dare. Hollow Creek had accepted their challenge, and the night was only just beginning to unveil its true, unforgiving nature. The group stood frozen, eyes wide as they stared at the spot where the spectral child had disappeared. The gate to the Craven house groaned as a gust of wind pushed it open, as if inviting them inside. The house loomed before them, its decrepit exterior bathed in the weak moonlight, windows like darkened eyes watching their every move. "This is insane," Sophie breathed out, her earlier excitement now replaced with palpable fear. "Maybe we should just go back." "No, we can't," Alex said, his voice steadier than he felt. "We've come this far. Besides, if the stories are true, we could get a wish. We could wish for, I don't know, something great." The allure of a wish hung in the air, heavier than the mist that began to creep along the ground. It was a chance to make their bravest dreams, or darkest desires, come true. They pushed through the gate, the metallic screech echoing through the night like a foreboding cry. As they approached the front door, the whispers started, soft at first, like the rustling of leaves, but growing in intensity until words began to form, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Leave. Do not want. Beware." The words slithered around them, cold and menacing, and it took all of Alex's willpower not to run. They reached the door, its old wood etched with symbols that none of them recognized, symbols that seemed to move in the corner of their eyes. Mark, ever the defiant one, reached out and grabbed the iron door knocker, shaped like a snarling beast, and let it fall with a thunderous boom that seemed to shake the very earth. The door swung open, revealing a darkness that was absolute, a void that beckoned them forward. With only their flashlights to guide them, they entered the Craven house. The air was thick, making each breath a laborious task. The beams of their lights flickered over antique furniture covered in dust, cobwebs that hung like drapes, and paintings that watched them with eyes that seemed to follow their every step. The whispers grew louder, turning into voices that called out to them. Alex's name echoed in his ears, making him whirl around, but there was nothing behind him. Only the emptiness of the house and the dim outline of his friends. They moved deeper into the house, towards the grand staircase that led to the upper floors. Each step creaked under their weight, as if the house itself was groaning in protest. They could feel it now, the house pulsing with a life of its own, a heartbeat that thrummed through the soles of their shoes. When they reached the top, they found themselves in a hallway lined with doors. The voices were clearer now, each one distinct. "Help me. I'm so cold. Mommy, where are you?" It was the voice of a child, and it pulled at Alex's heartstrings. Without thinking, he moved toward the sound, his friend's warnings drowned out by the plaintive cries. He opened the door from where the voice seemed to be emanating, and the sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. The room was a child's nursery, untouched by time. Toys were scattered on the floor. A rocking horse moved back and forth by some unseen force, and in the corner, a crib with its bars gnawed and bent outward. In the crib lay a doll, its face twisted into an eternal scream. Suddenly, the room filled with a cold so intense it burned, and the voices crescendo into a deafening roar. From the shadows, a figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, its eyes two glowing embers of hate. It was the witch of Hollow Creek, her curse as alive today as it had been all those years ago. "You dare seek a wish?" the witch hissed, her voice like the scratching of claws on wood. "Then a wish you shall have, but know this, there is always a price to pay." The temperature plummeted further, and a thick darkness began to seep from the walls, enveloping them in a blanket of fear. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, the witch's curse wrapping around them like chains. The group huddled together, their earlier bravado shattered by the reality of their situation. They had sought a thrill, a story to tell in hushed tones and with boastful laughter. Instead, they had found a nightmare that threatened to consume them, a terror that was all too real. They had to make a wish, to try and end this horror. But what wish could possibly combat the malevolence that threatened to engulf them? And what would be the price they had to pay? The Craven house held its breath, waiting for their choice, as the witch's laughter echoed through the halls, a sound that promised nothing but despair. Panic clawed at their chests. Each breath they drew was a struggle against the suffocating darkness. Sophie, tears streaming down her face, clutched at Alex's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Make a wish, Alex, do something!" She pleaded, her voice a terrified whisper that cut through the witch's cackling. But wishes were for fairy tales, and this was a nightmare. The witch advanced, her form blurring and shifting, a specter of rage and malice. "Choose," she screeched, her voice a vortex sucking at their sanity. In the face of abject horror, Alex's mind raced. What could he wish for? Salvation? Escape? He closed his eyes and the answer came. A wish not for himself, but for the lost souls this house had consumed. "I wish for their peace," he shouted into the dark. The house shuddered, as if the very foundation rebelled against the notion. A silence descended, the witch's laughter cut off, the child's cries stilled. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The darkness held its breath. Then the toys in the nursery began to float, surrounded by a faint glow. The spectral child appeared once more, its eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. Other spirits began to materialize throughout the house, faces of sorrow that had long been trapped in the witch's cruel grip. The witch's form wavered, her cloak of shadows unraveling. "You dare to defy my curse?" she howled, but her voice was weakening, the sound of wind through dead leaves. With every spirit that rose, the witch's presence dimmed. A cacophony of voices filled the air, not with despair, but with thanks. "Freedom," they whispered. "Release." Alex's group, encircled by the spirits, watched in awe as the nursery's chill gave way to a warmth like the kiss of the sun after a long winter. The doll in the crib's face smoothed into a tranquil expression. The rocking horse stilled. The witch, now no more than a wisp of smoke, gave one final scream before she evaporated, her essence scattering like ash on the wind. The Craven house, once a prison of pain, shone with a light pure and cleansing. The curse was broken, their fear forgotten, the friends embraced, laughing with a delirium that bordered on madness. They had come for a thrill and had become unwitting heroes in a story that would be passed down through the ages. The house around them creaked and groaned, its structure settling as though it too could finally rest. And rest they did, amid the remnants of a horror that would never again claim another soul. The night waned, and with the first rays of dawn, the spirits faded, leaving behind a serene silence that spoke of a long-awaited peace. Alex and his friends exited the house, stepping out into the cool morning air. They looked back at the Craven house one last time, now just an old building, its menace gone with the night. They left with no tangible reward, no riches or glory, but they carried with them the knowledge that they had faced the heart of darkness and had emerged not just unscathed, but triumphant. The first blush of dawn painted the horizon in hues of rose and gold as Alex and his friends stumbled from the threshold of Craven house, the ordeal behind them casting a surreal glow on their reality. They had survived a night that transcended the boundaries of their understanding, a harrowing confrontation with a malevolence that had, until that night, only existed in hushed tales and the annals of local legend. The town was waking up, its inhabitants unaware of the monumental shift that had occurred within the crumbling walls of the town's most infamous landmark. Alex glanced back at the house, half expecting to see the witch glaring at them from one of the broken windows, or to feel the chill of her curse nipping at their heels. But there was nothing, just an old house, silent and oddly respectful in the light of the new day. They didn't speak much on the way back to their own homes. What words could adequately encompass what they had experienced? They each bore the weight of the night differently, etched into their faces and settling into their bones. Alex's parents were already up, the familiar sounds of breakfast being prepared drifting through the house as he entered. "You're back late," his mother chided gently, but her eyes widened in concern at the sight of him. "What happened?" He shook his head, not yet ready to attempt an explanation. "Just a long night," he muttered, escaping upstairs to the sanctuary of his room. Sleep was elusive. Every time Alex closed his eyes, the echoes of the spirit's gratitude, the witch's wails, and the ethereal glow of release played behind his eyelids. As the sun climbed higher, streaming through his window, he finally drifted into a fitful doze, where the haunting events continued to replay. The news of Craven House's transformation spread through the town like wildfire. Without the oppressive aura of the witch's curse, the house was just a structure, albeit one with a notorious past. Soon there was talk of renovation, of repurposing the building, of moving forward. Weeks turned into months. The group, their bond cemented by the shared trauma and triumph, met often, but they spoke little of that night. Instead, they focused on the future, on college applications, on the final year of high school. Life moved on, as it inevitably does, but the shadow of that night lingered in their hearts, a dark backdrop to their youthful optimism. Craven House was renovated, turned into a community center, a place of laughter and life, where once there had been only pain and suffering. It stood as a testament to the town's resilience, to the idea that even the darkest past could be overcome. Alex visited sometimes, drawn by a mix of nostalgia and a need for closure. He would stand in the nursery, now a brightly lit classroom, and remember the ghostly child who had played with spectral toys. He'd smile, knowing that they had found peace, that their souls were no longer bound to the witch's bitterness. The final remnants of fear dissipated, replaced by a sense of purpose. The friends grew up, as children do, shaped in part by the night they spent in Craven House. They went off to college, started careers, and built lives. But every year on the anniversary of that night, they returned to the community center. They'd gather in the nursery, where the worst of the horror had unfolded, and they'd raise a toast, not to the terror they'd faced, but to the spirits they'd freed. And sometimes, just sometimes, they'd swear they could hear the faintest whisper of gratitude, a soft thank you carried on the wind, from souls who had once been lost, but were now eternally at rest. Well, there you have it, folks. A tale that might just keep you up tonight. If you dare to hear more stories that go bump in the night, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you won't miss out on any of our haunting adventures. Give this video a thumbs up if it sent a chill down your spine, and share it with those who could use a little scare. Remember, some stories are just tales, while others, well, let's just say you might want to keep that nightlight on. See you in the next video if you dare. Until then, sweet nightmares.